when I woke up, very confused. She said, "You almost died last night. In fact, no one can believe you were alive."
I went into the games not knowing what was coming.
As humans, we just hate uncertainty.
You just sensed that it was out there.
You have to start somewhere.
We're all programmed to push ourselves even farther.
This is On the X, an IRONCLAD original. Welcome to On the X. I'm Chris Irwin, and today my guest is Simon Sinek. Simon is an author, motivational speaker, and leadership expert who gained global recognition with his TED Talk, How Great Leaders Inspire Action, which introduced the concept of the golden circle and the importance of starting with why. As the founder of the Optimism Company, Simon focuses on improving personal and professional relationships by inspiring people to find purpose and foster trust. His best-selling books include Start With Why, Find Your Why, The Infinite Game, Together is Better, and Leaders Eat Last. Simon also hosts the A Bit of Optimism podcast, sharing thought-provoking conversations about leadership and growth. His work extends to collaborations with the RAND Corporation, government agencies, and branches of the U.S. Armed Forces. This turned into one of the most impassioned conversations I've had, and I had a ton of fun going into some semi-uncharted territory with him. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. So here we go with Simon Sinek on the X. If someone meets you and has no idea who you are, and they're like, "Hey, Simon, nice to meet you. What do you do for a living?" What do you tell them?
I teach leaders and organizations how to inspire people.
Okay. So you basically, it's sort of your why statement then.
Hmm?
Okay.
Yeah. I actually practice what I preach.
That's good to hear. What if they say, okay, give me a little bit more on that? Like, what do you say beyond that?
So if they wanted me to say about that, they say, well, I can tell you the reason that statement is such a refined statement. It took me many tries to get it right. If they believe what I believe, they say, inspire, cool. How do you do that? If they don't believe what I believe, they go, what kind of companies? So it's designed to, the people who hear my why hear the word inspire. The people who don't hear my why hear the word companies.
Yeah.
And so the next question will set me up to whether I know if they're early adopters or not, or believe what I believe or not. And if they say what kind of companies, I'm going to get out of that conversation reasonably quickly. Where if they say inspire, it doesn't really matter what direction I go in, because I've now piqued their curiosity and I can go in any number of directions.
Yeah. You grew up kind of in a few different parts of the world, right? You were born in England, and I think you lived in South Africa too, right? Is that right?
Yep, and Hong Kong.
How much of that do you think shaped your way of thinking about things? Did it have an impact, do you think?
Of course. I mean, every single one of us is a product of our childhood.
Sure, of course.
So I'm not the exception.
Yeah.
Of course it had an impact.
Yeah.
We lived in places where, Africa, Asia, Europe, and we kept moving around and changing as kids. And so my sister and I were very different personalities, and yet we're both very comfortable being in uncomfortable places. We're very comfortable being new and figuring it out. I think it also contributed to my sense of curiosity about the world. And that there are people who think differently than me and do things differently. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means it's different.
Yeah.
I think you can only get that from traveling.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. It's funny. I didn't necessarily do that, but because of what I did in the military for a long time, and then afterwards, even my kids, I think we figured this out at one point. I think my oldest son, by the time he was 8, had lived in 7 different houses. So in all different parts of the world too. And I just think it's really beneficial. I mean, it's just one of those things, you obviously can't pick that as a child, but I do think it's beneficial. What did your folks do that brought you all over the world?
My dad was an expat.
Okay.
And so the company moved us around.
Okay, got it. What were you doing before your kind of like breakout stuff with Start With Why? What were you doing before that?
I had a marketing company. I had a small marketing company, which, I always wanted to start my own business, and I did at the tender age of 28. And it was good. I mean, we had a good little run there. We had amazing clients. We did good work. But what set me on a new path was I fell out of love. I lost my passion for this thing that I thought I wanted to do for the rest of my life, which is, if you're, A-type personality and you wake up in the morning, you don't want to go to work in the morning. It gets a little dark, you sort of pretend that you're happier and more in control and more successful than you feel, which is exactly what I was doing. And it turns out when you're in a dark place and you keep it to yourself, it only gets darker.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to me. It was not a good place. And it was only when a very close friend of mine came to me and said, something's wrong here. You're not you anymore. What's going on? And I came clean. And that when that weight lifted off my shoulder and I no longer felt alone in that dark space, that's what gave me the courage and the wherewithal to figure out my challenge and figure out how to refine that passion that I had. And the solution that I found was this thing called the why. I knew what I did, I knew how I did it, but I realized I didn't know why. So that's what set me on this entirely new path. So I'm eternally grateful to that friend. Otherwise, my life wouldn't be what it is today.
And was that something that you sat and stewed on for a while? Was it something that had been percolating in your mind? Did you bolt up in bed one night and think, start with why? That's the solution.
I got into my bathtub and I saw the water rise and I said, Eureka.
Yeah.
No, all ideas, there was no bolting up, but there were realizations and there were points, when sort of ideas go like this,
Yeah.
Somebody asked me, how long did it take me to write Start With Why? And I said, every day of my life up until that day. So I had already tried to figure out why some marketing worked and some marketing didn't. And I realized already that pattern. I originally had it as why, what, how. And it was only later on that I matched it to the biology of human decision-making and it got even more powerful.
Yep.
But I already had that idea articulated to explain marketing. And it was when I learned about the biology, I sat, just total coincidence, I sat next to a person at some dinner, and her dad was a neuroscientist. And we just started talking about neuroscience, and she started explaining the basics of the limbic brain and the neocortex. And I thought it was interesting. So I went back and was like Googling it because I thought it was interesting. And that's when I realized this little model that I had sitting, to explain marketing and the biology of human decision-making overlapped. And that's when I realized, it was more of a realization that I hadn't discovered why marketing worked. I discovered why people do what they do. And I discovered that I was missing a piece.
Let me sort of frame up some of the thoughts that I had then about your kind of body of work, so to speak. When I look at Start With Why, Find Your Why, Leaders Eat Last, Infinite Game, and sort of try to distill that down into, to your point, an easily understandable framework for everybody. I throw it kind of into two buckets, an individual bucket, sort of a personal bucket, right? Like for people just out there on their own, right? Mm-hmm. And the other one would be for groups, whatever group that may be, whether it's a team, companies, right? And trying to, obviously there's a lot of overlap there, but figuring out like, okay, which of these things apply here and where do we start, right? So if someone's starting with, I view it as, would you agree that you have to start at an individual level with that kind of stuff? The Start With Why, does the Start With Why have to be a personal thing first before it's a company thing first, before it's a company thing?
No. The order, look, let me come at it as sideways. Mm-hmm. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow got it wrong. Right? Because there's an inherent paradox to being a human. Every moment of every day, we are both individuals and members of groups, whether we like it or not. You are you, and you are also a father. You are a member of a team. You're a member of a company. You're a member of a church. You're a member of a community, and you're you. And on a regular basis, you will be faced with choices that will ask you, do you want to prioritize yourself over the group, or do you want to prioritize the group over yourself? And there are entire schools of thought that says you have to put yourself first. If you're not healthy, you can't take care of the group. And there's an entire school of thought that says, no, you have to take care of the group first so that they're there to help you be healthy. And the answer is you're both right, you're both wrong. It's a paradox. That's why it's difficult to be human, because we live this duality every day. Mm-hmm. When Maslow did his hierarchy of needs, he puts at the base, he puts food and shelter. Right? The third level up is human relationships. I've never heard of anyone dying by suicide because they were hungry. Mm-hmm. I've heard of people dying by suicide because they were lonely.
Mm-hmm.
Which means human relationships seems to be more important than food or shelter. Well, it depends. if you're talking about us as members of groups, then human relationships are more important than food and shelter. If you're talking about me as an individual by myself, living, you put me out in the woods by myself, then food and shelter probably is number one, right? And the top of his thing is self-actualization, which is awful if you think about it. It's like, I'm going to sit up here on this mountain, self-actualized, looking down at all the unactualized people, versus shared actualization. But the answer is it's both. He was really only thinking about individuals, but he failed to consider us as members of groups. And so when you ask me the question, do I start with me? Do I start with us? The answer is yes.
Okay.
You're eventually going to have to do both. And so you fight the fight that's easiest to fight. You fight you deal with the challenges closest to you first. And so if you're going through a period where self-reflection is the thing you need to do, that was what happened to me. But it happened to me because the group was failing around me. I was running a company that wasn't working. I was running a company that I don't think my employees respected me anymore because I had lost touch with my own why. So yes, I had to work on myself first, but it was the group that failed that got me there.
Yeah.
So it's all a messy mess, of us interrelating with individuals. I need to work on myself because I can't hold down a job and all my relationships keep failing. Well, okay, you see what I mean? So the answer is you're going to have to deal with both at some point. So deal with the one that's the one you can deal with. Even going through the experience as an individual, you can't do it alone. You cannot do it alone. None of us have objectivity on ourselves. And so when we talk about a why discovery, I tell people you're going to have to ask somebody to help you learn your own why.
Yeah.
You can't evaluate yourself. It doesn't work that way. So even going on and when anybody who's dealt with any kind of personal difficulty, no human being is strong enough to deal with any of that stress by themselves. We can deal with personal stress much easier just by having a friend sit with us in the mud. They don't have to fix us. They don't have to do the work. But for us to feel not alone in struggle is the thing that gives us the courage to take ourselves on. That's what happened to me. I had a friend who sat in mud with me. She didn't do the work. I did the work. But she made me feel not alone and gave me the courage to do the work that I needed to do. And so all of my work is interpersonal. Even the stuff that you have to do alone, there's an interpersonal component that goes with it.
Yeah.
All of my work is about human connection. So the simple answer to your question is it's both, but you're always going to need someone by your side.
Is that harder to do these days, though? Given how much more isolated we are, how much more stuff is virtual. I was even in the terms of companies in general, building a company culture. I was hearing you talk about this on a podcast or an interview or something like that, where isn't that much harder to do when your workforce is much more distributed, potentially, right? Like you're not physically together anymore.
It's harder to do for all the reasons. It's harder to do because the workforce is distributed. It's harder to do because we're not good at asking for help. It's harder to do because we don't want to bother anybody. It's harder to do because if we do ask for help, we do it over a text. We don't know what someone's doing in that moment. They're not, how present is someone when they just respond to a text? They got the TV on in the background, It's harder to do for a plethora of reasons. See, I should have said a lot.
Yes, well, I understand plethora.
But anyway, going back on my own my own standard of using smaller words, it's very funny. The simple answer is it is more difficult, and we lack the skills to even ask for help. Most people don't even know how to do it. And one of the things I think, this is the SEAL Foundation.
Yes.
There's a lot of SEALs who are listening. You yourself were one. And one of the things that I know about anybody who wears that badge is what distinguishes you from others is that you care more than others think possible. And every SEAL I've ever met has a level of care for their fellow SEAL, especially, that people who didn't serve, and certainly people who didn't wear that badge, like they can't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And every vet I've ever talked to, whether they loved the military or hated the military, they all miss the camaraderie. They all miss the brotherhood and the sisterhood. And so I think somebody like you who's lived the life that you lived leaning on someone and asking for help, your survival depended on it. You learned how to do it. You learned how to say, I screwed up. You learned how to say, I don't know. You learned how to say, I need you to help me. And that's a skill set that I don't think people who are vets realize how valuable that skill set is in the real world, in every world, but especially in the world that really lacks that skill.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, though, is in those situations, it's more about like you spend so much time worrying about the other people around you than yourself. You spend a lot more time not even asking for help. It's just like, can I help somebody else? Right? Like I'm going to help this guy, this person before me. And that's sort of baked into the ethos of the whole thing in the first place, And I think, actually, I kind of wanted to ask you this too, in terms of, one of the things I see is, let's keep it in the veteran space here. People that are in the military for a long time, whether that's 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And the challenges that they have when they get out, it is loss of sort of community. It's loss of purpose, of a sort of a just cause, as you would put it, right? Like something bigger than myself that's beyond. And I think people feel that all of that was associated with the job and that it's no longer here. And I'm curious have you ever worked with people or like have suggestions for folks where, is there a way to like go through the sort of the why discovery process to help find a new path from that?
So the simple answer is yes. Now, there's an irony in this, which is not everybody loved the military for the same reasons, right? Yeah, there's God and country, sure, but it's guy to the left and guy to the right, right? And the purpose that people felt, you can find other places. Ironically, it actually won't be a different thing. It'll just be a different flavor of the same thing. And so, you can find companies or organizations where you can get that sense of, it won't be as exaggerated, it won't be as intense, but you can get it. Because not everybody's driven by the same thing. But yes, the simple answer is you can find it again. Yes.
And does that have to does doing the sort of a why there, if someone's never done that before, does that really help kind of elucidate that? Does it help kind of like? Yeah.
So the advantage of being able to articulate your own why is that you get to be conversant in the thing that inspires and drives you.
Yeah.
So usually we rely on our gut decisions to make these things, but nobody can read our guts. And so by being able to put your why into words, you can communicate who you are a little more clearly. Just like when you said, what do I say to people? And I said people hear two different words, but I can speak more precisely when somebody says, what's your why? It's to inspire people to do the things that inspire them. So together, each of us can change our world for the better. And there's an entire group of people who hear, and they hear that they think that is so cheesy. All that like inspiring people, blech, those aren't my people. But if I sit down for an interview or I'm starting a company and I say, look, this is why I do what I do, and this is what I'm going to figure out a product or a service to build upon this and find ways to deliver this to the world. If you believe what I believe, batter up. And if you've got the skills that I need around me to help me do this, then we're going to have a good time together. Or if I'm in an interview and they say, so why did you take this interview? And I've done this, by the way. Whenever I have a meeting, I always say, let me tell you why I called this meeting or why I said yes to coming to this meeting every time. And I say what my cause is. I say what my why is. Sometimes I say what my cause is: to build a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired, feel safe wherever they are, and end the day fulfilled by the work that they do. And I said, and I thought that when I read about your organization, it sounded like you're doing things that could actually help me advance my cause. So I thought it would be important to at least sit down and meet with you and find out who you are and what you're doing. You can say that as a potential employee. I read about your company and this is what I want to do, and I want to work at a place that helps me advance my own self and advance the things that I believe in the world. And this might be a good fit for me to come and do that, a place to realize my own cause and live my own purpose. You can speak in those terms, and the people who are listening will either think you're cheesy in which case they won't hire you, thank goodness. Or they will be like, oh my God, that's us. That's who we are too. You know, there's this excitement. And usually, you know, when you're having a Y level conversation, because the reactions tend to be emotional, because the Y is deeply emotional. It's called connection or chemistry, right? When it's all rational, like, you've had a very good career and I see you've had a lot of success in the previous. We would be very much grateful to have your skills. Like, you don't know if there's going to be a spiritual and philosophical connection. All they know is you got a skill that they need and they got a job that needs your skill. And hopefully you want to find a place where it's not just skill need to skill asset.
Yeah.
So yes, learning how to talk about it is more likely to help you land in a place where you're more likely to get it, even if they're not conversant in it.
So
one side needs to be conversant in it, but not necessarily both.
Yeah. So flip it on around to the other side. Like when you talk to companies and talk about like best hiring practices, what do you tell them? What do you see that they screw up or don't do well?
They start with the job need, right? Looking for a technologist, looking for a web coder.
Yep.
Okay, well, there's a lot of those. And a lot of them will not do well here, right? Start with who you are, what you believe. You know, like this is what we believe. This is if this kind of world excites you, we might have a job for you. Like exclude all the people who are not into the vision and into the cause right off the bat.
Yeah.
So I'm a great, you know, when I preach starting with why, I mean it in all contexts of communication, especially job leads.
On the X is proudly presented by Mechanics Wear, the gloves trusted by pros. Originally designed by a legendary race mechanic, Mechanics Wear has become the top choice for anyone who needs tough, reliable protection. From construction sites to the front lines, these gloves offer unbeatable comfort, durability, and grip. Stay cool, dry, and in control with Mechanics Wear. Gear up for whatever comes your way. And just speaking personally, Mechanics gloves were the go-to glove for us in the military, certainly. And they're still my go-to glove when it comes to just working around the house. Glove that I've worn for decades at this point, and it's still kind of my go-to glove. Mechanics Wear gloves are available at most retailers, as well as on mechanics.com and on GSA Advantage. Mechanics Wear is also proud to offer an exclusive 15% off discount through the ID.me program to military, veterans, and first responders. Click on the ID.me button in your shopping cart and follow the steps to verify your eligibility. Do skills matter at all? This is one of these things that I struggle with a little bit, right? It's like, I think of SEAL training, okay? Yeah. Guys that when we go into that pipeline is all about figuring out who you are as a person. It is about character and capacity, right? It's like, we're going to dump a bunch of stuff on these guys, see what they can handle. And then in these worst case scenarios, when they're abjectly miserable, how do they act, right? Yeah. And it has nothing to do with skill sets whatsoever. I always tell people, like, nobody who becomes a SEAL has any experience being a SEAL before that, right? Zero, none. But what I struggle with is, how does a company do something like that? They can't put someone through a 6-month crucible where they're cold, wet, and sandy. And to some extent, some level of skill sometimes matters, right? But it certainly isn't the whole thing. And people often focus way too much on that. Oh, this person has so much, or experience. They have so much experience. And it's like, well, yeah, they're 55, right? They've been around a long time. That doesn't mean they're the best for the job. Yeah. So is there a hiring practice that companies can put into play to test for character?
So I want to back into that. It's such a good question, right? Because I
got a good one. Good. We're not rehashing old information.
So it's such a good question, right? Because it's such a good question. Like, you know, the old Herb Kelleher quote, you hire for culture, you can always teach skills.
Yes, right, exactly.
Right, but skills are still on the list.
Yes,
they just don't come first. Like, so sure, somebody could make it through buds, but if they can never, ever, ever hit straight, if they can never shoot straight and they can never hit a target, at some point you're going to have a heart to heart with them, be like, bud, awesome, but you're just not going to make it here.
Yep. Right.
So at some point, the skill matters. I think where companies get it wrong is they start with skills and then they think about the culture or the character later. And what SEALs did is they start with character and then they worry about, can we teach you the skills and can you learn those skills? And if you can, right? Because then you're going to do great. So what we're simply saying is, what's the order of operations? Skills, of course, matter, but they don't matter first. Character matters first. And so the reason, and you said it, which is the military and the SEALs evaluate character. The SEALs evaluate character before skills because it matters if you're going to operate at that level. And companies could do better at evaluating character first. But they go to skill first because, let's be honest, it's easier. There's no other reason. It's because character is it's subjective sometimes in a business context, like how do you evaluate character? You can make them take some tests, like some companies do that.
Yeah.
There's little tricks that some companies do, like they don't call you back and they see how badly you want the job. Whether you agree or disagree, that's a good one. One of the things that I like to do is, if I'm interviewing somebody, is like we have all the interviews, and if there's somebody that we like, I want to go out for dinner with them, go out for lunch with them.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go to a non-corporate environment and sit with them across the table. I want to talk about their kids. I want to talk about their families. I want to talk about where they grew up. I want to hear how they have normal conversation. I want to hear how they interact. I want to see how they interact with the wait staff.
Yeah.
To see if I don't mind if they're late, but I want to see how they take responsibility if they're late.
Yeah.
Like it's all those little things that actually do give clues to character.
Yep.
We just don't bother doing them because, to your point, at a smaller scale, it's time consuming. I have to go have freaking lunch for 3 hours with some guy.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it matters here's the other piece of it, right? Is like hire once well, or you're going to hire like 3 times poorly. Right.
Right. Exactly. It's like a friend of mine who was a consultant said, my client never has the time or money to do it right the first time, but they always have the time and money to do it again. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And why not do it up front? Right.
Why not do it up front? And as you said, my adage has always been hire slowly and fire slowly,
Yeah.
And this hire fast, fire fast, I completely disagree. And it speaks to a laziness. It speaks to I'm just going to churn through people because I won't do the work up front,
Yep.
And I think it's disrespectful to the people, and it's ultimately counterproductive for the organization.
Yes.
It's horrible to a human being to do that, to just treat them like fodder.
Yeah.
So hire slowly and fire slowly, take time and give somebody the benefit of the doubt until you you've run out of options.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that this thought occurs to me sometimes. Do you think we put too much emphasis on leadership sometimes?
That's a good question. Do we put too much emphasis on leadership? Well, it depends if you're defining how you're defining leadership, right? If you're talking do we put too much emphasis on the hierarchy, then yes.
Okay.
Right? But if you're talking about the person who's the leader who they wish they had, who you good? They take responsibility for those around them, and they want to see those around them rise. Because the way I define leadership is it's the awesome responsibility to see those around you rise. Nothing to do with rank or authority.
Right. Yeah. No, and I agree with you on that. I think what I'm saying is I feel like sometimes all the messaging is about like leadership training, and we're going to train leaders, and we need better leaders and everything. And there's not necessarily as much about, but we need a better group ultimately. We need a better team ultimately.
Well, I think yes. I mean, I think this is the paradox of this conversation, right? Which is leader is useless by themselves.
Yeah. Right. Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, leading what? Leading whom?
Yeah.
Like, and the best leaders I've ever met are also the best followers.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I mean, I was with a group of people, all of us A-type personalities, all of us leaders in our own organizations, all of us like freaking go, right? And the shit hit the fan, and we were in a moment of crisis together. And one of us basically took charge, and she was a freaking rock star, and she was go. And you just watch these remarkable leaders just fall in line. There was no competition. There was no egos. Everybody was like, what do you need? Right? And I think the skills that make someone a great leader make someone a great follower. And the best leaders don't think of themselves, like even the Pope reports to someone higher,
Yeah, good point.
Like, the President of the United States reports to something higher.
Sure.
So I think even the best leaders see themselves as in service to something or someone.
Yeah. Is that something this is a really simple question, but is leadership a thing that you see where it's more of an innate quality for people, or it's a skill set that they learn, or a mix of both, or where it's, there are born leaders, but you can learn it too?
I think all leaders are made.
Really?
Yeah. I think you go look at old footage of Steve Jobs or Ronald Reagan, you will see incredibly unimpressive people.
Huh.
Go read about Mahatma Gandhi, right? He was a failed lawyer. He failed. And he lived in the UK and couldn't make it through law school, or he failed as a lawyer. I can't remember whether he made it. And so he moved to South Africa, where it was easier. And he got a job there thinking he would just be a lawyer, but he saw all this injustice. And so partly it's the situation he was in, but he learned it, and he learned his philosophies, and he studied, and leaders study each other. They quote each other. MLK quoted Gandhi, right?
Right. Sure. And
so I think there's a refining. And when you say some of them look like they're born because they might have learned it young from amazing parents or in some experience they had when they were young.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like they were born that way. Some may have capacity, like talent.
Yes, right. Like a talent for leading. That's what I'm saying. Yep.
You know what I mean? Like a great basketball player. That kid's got talent, but they're gonna have to work really hard to make it pros.
Right. Yeah.
So there are some people that have the basic talents that would set them up for leadership, but they're still gonna have to do the work. So there's still a making component of it. Just sort of sitting back and look how great I am.
Yeah.
I don't think that exists.
Yeah. When you work with companies, do you see a difference between, this is sort of like a Jim Collins promote from within, promote from without type of thing, like a difference or is it better to kind of rise through the ranks, CEO leader, versus hire from without, which is what I think Jim would say in his work, or is that different from what you've seen?
I think it's irrelevant. I think it depends if they believe in the cause, right? So if you're hiring from within, that they've, like Doug McMillon, who's now the CEO of Walmart, he started off in the warehouse, right? That guy, he drank the Kool-Aid. He's hook, line, and sinker. He's somebody who's probably going to lead well because he understands that ethos of that organization, right? But that doesn't mean you can only hire within. And Jim Collins, if he says hire without is better, okay, well then.
No, he says the opposite. Yeah.
But that's not true either, because there's been plenty of CEOs that came in from the outside, but they believed in the ethos. I think the problem is, and it goes back to character versus skill, which is 99 times out of 100, the board is choosing leaders with a proven track record, blah, 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 and they're hiring for skill set, and they're hiring for, path. Look at the turnarounds that this guy's done, and he comes in and starts laying people off. And so I think hiring from that. I talked to one of the big hiring firms a bunch of years ago, and I was posing them this question. I said, what if you're hiring, let's say Southwest Airlines needs a new CEO. I said, where do you recruit from? They said, well, we'll go to all the other airlines. I said, well, that's stupid, don't you think? They're like, well, we need somebody who knows the airline business to run an airline. I'm like, I don't think that's true. I said, Southwest Airlines is all about the common person, right? The average Joe, who, that's the champion for the common man. That's who they are, right? Wouldn't it be smarter to take somebody who thrived and really belonged and did well, let's say Dunkin' Donuts, who has the same ethos, and they'll learn the airline business later.
Yeah, right. That just goes back to the character versus skill thing.
Right. So I think Jim Collins, though he's saying from within for the right reasons, I think it's irrelevant whether someone's from within or without, so long as they buy into the ethos and buy into the cause. And it's generally a little easier to evaluate that if they're internal, but we rarely bother to evaluate that if they're external.
Mm-hmm.
We look at their skill set and their track record and we're like, this guy's great,
Yeah.
Then
if company
airplanes start crashing.
If I shouldn't laugh at that. If companies if you're trying to hire somebody, a leader, are there specific characteristics that you should be looking for, where it's like these 2 things. These 3 things are the most important thing that I should.
Yeah. So I charisma, vision, I know some great leaders that don't have big Steve Jobs visions. And I also know some great leaders who you find out that they're the leader, like that's the leader, like you wouldn't describe them as charismatic.
Right.
Right. And not by a traditional definition anyway. I think for me, there's 2 things and they're kind of inextricably linked. So they kind of go together. I think for me, the number one thing that I look for is courage, right? Which is leadership sucks. Leadership is hard. And the courage to do the right thing, the courage to take a short-term loss, the courage to put people ahead of profits, the courage to speak truth to power, the courage to be honest about yourself and your own failings. I think those things are all unbelievably difficult things to do, and make for great leaders. And, inextricably linked to that is integrity. That when somebody has integrity and the courage to follow that integrity, man, great things happen because great people will surround that person and they will make sure that great things happen. So I'd love to hear your opinion based on your experiences in the field, but I think courage and integrity rank high.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. I think what I worry about these days a little bit is it feels almost like the incentives out there are not in alignment with those things.
You have just articulated the problem with American business today.
Yeah, I think so.
This is what Jack Welch broke when he reinvented capitalism. And the capitalism we have today is not the capitalism that made America great. This is not Adam Smith capitalism. This is some bastardized, twisted Milton Friedman, Jack Welch bullshit capitalism that enriches the few at the cost of the many. And that's not what capitalism is supposed to be. That's not what it ever was designed to do, where we put a shareholder ahead of a customer. That's not what capitalism is. That never was. We live in a world now, like you would never buy a new car just so that you can buy gas, right? You
Right.
buy a car so that you can go somewhere and you need the gas to get there. Well, a company is a car, and we don't start companies just to make money. We start companies to go somewhere, to do something, to contribute to something, and we need the money to make the company go, right? And no one's going to get into your car and they'll be like, great, how much gas are we buying? They're going to get in your car and be like, where are we going? And that's where you need that visionary who sits in the front seat looking out the window going, I'm looking a million miles ahead and this is where we're going to go. And I think we now live in a world in which we literally buy cars just to buy gas, which is completely screwed up. And then we incentivize people going, listen, if you help us get a lot of gas, I will give you more gas than you've ever dreamed of having. And you're absolutely right. The whole incentive structure is completely screwed up. When we started incentivizing senior leaders, not based on the performance of the company, but based on the performance of the equity, you knew things were going to start going sideways.
Right.
Do you know, when companies announce they make a significant investment in R&D, the stock price goes down. When they make an announcement that they're making mass layoffs, the stock price goes up. That is screwed up. And that is the world we live in today.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're 100% right. All of the complaining we have about capitalism, business, the 1%, go down the list of every complaint that the left has and every complaint that the right has. We fix the incentive structures, we're good.
Yeah. So how do we do that? And like, what's the way out of that though? Because to your point, the system is so incentivized the other way at this point.
Well, it took us 40 years to get here. It's going to take us 20 or 30 years to get out of it. But I think part of it is a younger generation. I think the younger generation, remember, you and I are of an age where when I talk about the gold watch, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
Right? I've done this on the stage where I'll talk about the gold watch and I'll make a joke. I'm like, raise your hand if you have no idea what I'm talking about. Like there's an entire generation that when we talk about the gold watch, they do not know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? The concept of working your entire career for one company and then being given a gold watch out of gratitude at the end of your tenure does not exist. And I don't blame I don't blame employees. Companies set the rules, employees play by the rules, right? So it used to be that company gave you care and loyalty and employee gave back care and loyalty. That was the deal. But then companies started not. They started saying, well, look, we've missed our projections. We're going to be profitable, just not as profitable as we promised Wall Street. So I'm sorry, you lose your job. Oh, and by the way, it's not a meritocracy because you've been doing great work and you've been working here for 20 years, but nothing personal, it's just business, right? Which is such a crock of shit. And those are the rules that became completely normalized. Mass layoffs did not exist in the United States prior to the 1980s. It didn't exist. It's a relatively new construction. It is not part of capitalism. It is a new construction. It was normalized by people like Jack Welch. And it became completely normalized in the 90s and 2000s, where CEOs now go on television and make these announcements without any shame. You should be embarrassed that that's your strategy, right? But those were the rules that the company set, that we no longer give you loyalty, though we demand it back. And at some point, employees started going, no. And you have a young generation, that has grown up watching their parents get laid off through no fault of their own. They went to work thinking everything was fine and then came home because the company, quote unquote, missed its projections. And so young kids who are now in the labor pool are going, that deal doesn't work for me. And so what we accuse them of, entitlement and all of this stuff, quite frankly, I think is just a Newtonian reaction. For every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. And if you give it enough time, there's going to be a consequence for the way that you run a business. And I think those consequences are showing up now. So there's a young generation that looks at that form of capitalism and the management that's existed and goes, that doesn't work for me. And my hope is that they're listening to podcasts like this one and saying, you know what, I'm going to lead differently. I'm not going to lead like my dad or my mom. I'm going to lead not like the previous generations, no matter what they taught in business school. Even that stuff they're teaching business schools backwards. I'm going to lead in a different way where I'm going to prioritize the care of people and then watch what happens. And I am going to take longer viewpoints on the success of my company. I don't really care about the quarter. I may not even care about the year. I just care about the trajectory and the trend of how I'm doing. Like when I go on a long drive, I don't actually care if I drove 100 miles a day or 150 miles, but I do care that I get to where I'm going in a reasonable period of time, even if it's not the exact time that I expected. And I'm very bullish that this young generation will start to undo some of the damages of the boomer generation.
Yeah, it certainly does seem like the younger generation, whatever that is, right? I mean, we talk about millennials and Gen Z and
I count Gen X.
Okay, I'm Gen X.
I'm Gen X as well.
Yeah, you and I are about the same age.
And I want to completely undo everything that the boomers did, to the business world. So I think, X, Y, and Z need to band together and say, let's do this.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does seem like they care way more about, I don't know about purpose, but like, I'm trying to find the right word for it, but like a cause, a vision, that kind of thing, right?
Purpose as well.
Yeah.
Look, I could not have the career that I have right now in the 1980s. Like if I talked about purpose at work, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I would have been like laughed at. In fact, when I started 15 years ago talking about purpose at work, it didn't exist. I had to change the words to make people listen to me. I couldn't talk about vision and mission and purpose. I talked about the why.
Right.
Because otherwise no one would purpose at work. Are you kidding? Purpose is for like church and for hippies, right? And so I changed the terminology so that the people who I needed to listen would listen. I wasn't just preaching to the converted. Now, every freaking company has a purpose statement on their website. Now, whether they follow it or not or believe it or not, is a different conversation. But the fact that they all have one means that there's enough social pressure to have one that at least it's moving in the right direction, which is the opposite of what Jack Welch was doing.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Shop the new Freedom Capsule at bornprimitive.com.
Do you think that you had something to do with that? Did you sort of spawn this idea, or do you think it was like, what do you think what was it about that 15 years ago that was like the right time, right place, whatever, where just it captivated so many people? What was it about it? Or was it just you?
I didn't invent purpose at work.
Well, I know, but just like the concept, right? I mean, why did the start with why at that time catch fire the way it did, right?
There's a few reasons. I mean, right time, right place was definitely one of them.
Yeah.
Definitely a luck component. There's no question. But I also think that I was, the one thing that I was paying attention to was I was definitely hearing people who I instinctively agreed that I would like to come to work for more than just to make money. Like that didn't feel right to me. And I'm not motivated by money. It's not my thing, Like I want to be a part of a great team who's doing great things and contributing, and we can lie on our deathbeds and be like, I'm super proud, right? Nobody puts their last balance on their bank account on their tombstones, right? Nobody. What we write about the kind of people, good, great mother, great sister, devoted, like this is what we write on our tombstones, devoted father. Like we want to be remembered for the kind of people we were. Nobody eulogizes about how much money we made.
Yeah.
Right. And so it felt wrong for me, the way my company talked to me, the way they incentivized me, it just wasn't my thing. And there were a group of people who I knew agreed with me, but they literally sounded like frickin' hippies. And I didn't want to be a part of no hippie commune either.
Yep.
I want to do stuff. And so the one thing I did, I got tired of having debates of things like what comes first, vision or mission.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, an entire debate with someone, what comes first, vision or mission? These stupid semantic debates. So I went to people who believed vision comes first. I said, what's vision? They said, it's why we get out of bed. I went to people who believe mission comes first. I said, what's mission? They said, it's why we do what we do.
Right.
I went to people and said, what is purpose? Why does purpose come first? They all gave me the same definition. So I said, great, let's call it the why. We can all agree now we can actually do something rather than have semantic debates.
Right.
So, that was the thing that I think that I was able to contribute to the movement, was a language that made us all coalesce.
Yeah. Let's talk just a little bit about infinite game, because this is something that I always think of it as process. It might be sort of a similar thing here, where it's like we're all talking about the same thing, but being able to fall in love with the process and not some kind of end state. And I actually think of it a lot these days in terms of mental health, because that's a big deal to me. That's something that's kind of my why. It's not articulated exactly in the format, but the idea of being able to train it as a fitness discipline instead of a treatment discipline, right?
Yeah.
And in that context, it's an infinite game. It is something that you show up every day and you work on it, just like your physical fitness. You're never done. You never win it, right? So as you look at that, like, is that learning to fall in love with the process? Is that the same thing, or are those different things?
Another good question. So by the way, I concur entirely with you. I completely agree. And to the point where I won't use the term mental health anymore.
Yeah.
Because mental health sounds like a thing to achieve, where you either have it or you don't.
It sucks.
And to your point, it's mental fitness.
Yeah. I use mind fitness, actually. That's my preferred term. Yep.
So, I mean, I use mental fitness, same thing, right?
Yep,
But the point is the word fitness is the operative word.
Yes.
So that's a very good construction, because is it the process? I think process is inextricably linked, that you have to be more enamored with the process than with the outcome.
Right.
You can still measure outcomes and you can still measure progress. That's important. People think, when I talk about the infinite game and my bias for it, that it means that that at the exclusion of the finite game, which it is not. It is the context within which those finite games exist. So if you're working out, you would like to look in the mirror and see yourself would like to be able to know that you used to curl, 30 pounds and now you're curling 35. Like you want to be able to count progress, because it makes you feel good. It makes you stay in the process. If you got nothing, you'd leave the process or find a new process. So I don't know if it's the same, because I think part of it is also mindset, right? Having an infinite mindset that, because I talked about being cause-based and driven by cause, we wouldn't necessarily say it's for love of process.
Okay.
So I think they're inextricably linked.
Yeah.
I think that they go together.
I just think of like the people that turn into sort of the most successful people in their field. Look, take yourself as an example too. Like they're sort of in love with the process. I take this a little bit from Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art, where he's like Arnold Schwarzenegger. If the world was ending, maybe not these days, but like certainly in his prime, he would go to the gym, right? Eddie Van Halen, if the world was ending, he would still be playing guitar because he loved, it wasn't about being a rock star. That was an outcome, right? That was sort of a side effect almost. And I'm sure he enjoyed that, but it was like, I love playing this guitar every day and I'm still going to do it no matter what, you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if that's true. I mean, because I don't think if it was the last day on earth. You know.
It's an extreme example, but you get the idea there.
I don't know. I think people with an infinite mindset recognize that the process is the thing.
Yeah, right.
I still think the process is just that. It's a process. It's the methodology to, you know, it's being in love with the journey. It's another way of saying journey, right?
Yeah. Right. Yep.
The destination is the journey.
Yes.
So I think it's just another way of saying you got to love the journey. You got to love the process. You got to love, I think it's the same thing, but it's the infinite mindset is sort of the infinite game is sort of the reason why being in love with the journey or being in love with the process is the thing.
And how do you measure that then? How do you measure success in like an infinite game, so to speak, or measure, is it fulfillment? Is it,
No. You can, the finite metrics, the traditional metrics work just fine.
Okay.
It's not the absence of finite metrics. So it's the point is, so like the analogy that I always give is, you know, you can have finite goals, right? I want to lose X amount of weight by X date. Great. Right. And so you eat right, you exercise right, you measure yourself every day. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. Sometimes you're pissed off, sometimes you're excited. Right. And on the right day and the right time, you hit your goal, you celebrate. But the problem is you have to keep exercising for the rest of your life. It was arbitrary.
Yeah.
Right. Or what I think is more interesting is what happens if you miss your goal? What happens if you get to that date and you didn't hit the number? Are you a failure?
Yeah.
No, of course not. Right? Of course you're not a failure. Right? In fact, you're in better shape than you've ever been. You just picked the wrong date and the wrong time.
Yeah.
Right? You'll clearly in a month you'll be fine. You'll hit it. But again, it's to your point about process, which is I do measure the waypoints because what the measurements tell you two things: speed and distance. Mm-hmm. How far you've gotten and how fast you're going. That's it. Right? In the infinite game. In a finite game, the end score matters, but that's because there's a winner or loser and there's a beginning, middle, and end. But you still have to feel like there's progress. Otherwise, you're going to have to adjust something. So if you're working out every day and you see at no point in time over the course of weeks or months, there's no metric improvement in any place.
Yeah.
You're going to have to find a new process.
It's what you just said is
like lifting that pencil every day. I think you might have to up the weight.
Yeah. What you just said is really interesting. I've never thought of it that way, that you can only like measuring it's just speed and distance. I've never thought about that, but I'm sitting here sort of calculating mentally like things that I would measure that aren't, you know, weights and volume and whatever, temperature and shit like that, but just things in my life. And it's like, yeah, I guess that is right. Like it's how far have I come with this thing and how quickly am I doing it, so to speak, right? Huh.
And I think the other thing we forget is that, and this is business definitely gets this wrong, which is these things are a dial, not a switch.
Yeah.
Right. They're adjustable based on your process. Right. Like I love when companies say to me, like, they say it with such pride, I'm a hyper growth company. Show me one article in any reputable publication that says that hypergrowth is good for business. Just one. Okay.
We're obsessed with it though.
We're obsessed with hypergrowth.
Yeah.
Literally, there's nothing to show that it's good. So I'll give you an example, right, of where growth must be a dial. We treat it like a switch. We're like, this is the goal, you know? Okay, so let's say I'm a retail operation and my goal is open 40 stores this year. And we're hiring so fast, we're not training properly. And what we did is we opened 40 shitty retail experiences that are disastrous. The employees hate their jobs. The customer hates it. well, is that good for business? My VC's really happy with me because I opened all 40 stores, but how good is that for business? But if you see yourself driving at this pace going, I don't think we're doing this right. There's that courage and integrity thing again. And then you change the dial. You go, instead of 40, let's do 7. You know, I know that's not our goal, but we're not doing the goal right.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing. You could say that about anything, which is, I know guys who are like freaking machines at the gym, but they're doing it so much that they actually break their bodies. Well, was that good? You know? So I know, like, I mean, you know this better than I do. It's like, you know, when I go for a run and I'm out of shape and I feel things hurting, what goes through my mind is, push through the pain, Simon. You know how to push through the pain. You could push through the pain. Or do I say, it's been a while since you've run. I think you should slow down and you can run another day.
Yeah.
And you got to play that little exercise.
Yes.
You know, like,
well,
is this a muscle pain or is this a joint pain?
Yeah.
This muscle will repair, joint, I'm done.
Well, this is a thing. This is sort of like a mindset thing that I have an issue with, which is, I think there's too much focus these days on exactly that. Just grind through, push harder, just go faster, just do more. And that's a tool, and that's helpful in certain circumstances. Certainly in the context of special operations missions and things like, got it, need that, right? But too often, like,
but not every day.
Not every day, and too often, I think, like, we see this with the military and veterans and stuff like that. It's like, we end up thinking that's the only tool out there, right? And then it's guys are struggling mentally, and it's like, well, I'm just going to push through, right? I'm just going to suck it up, which is like the worst thing you can do there. But it's like, well, that's the only tool in the toolbox, right?
This is the greatest insight. I'm so grateful for this conversation.
We've come a long way since the beginning. Then that's good.
Grinding is a tool.
It is
so good. It's so good. Grinding is a tool. Yes, it is. For me, the analogy is I lost my train of thought.
It's one tool, right?
It's one tool.
So it's like, I look at
here's the analogy in leadership. Here's the analogy in leadership, which is and you know this better than most people, right? Which is, you can't do command and control every day. Like, when you're back at home, like, you actually do have to, like, check in with people, see how they're doing, ask for other people's points of view and opinions. But when you're in freaking chaos, there's no time for checking in. There's no time for worrying about your feelings. You default to command and control, but you've built trust with your team, and they know that you're not going to make, even though you might make mistakes, you're not going to make a decision that unnecessarily puts them at risk, because the trust has already been built and they will not doubt you, and the command and control is highly effective.
Right.
But as soon as you're out of chaos, the command and control has to stop. And, like, in the civilian world, we watch movies about General Patton, and, like, they make movies, you know, say what you want about Patton, but they generally make movies about bad leaders, like Commander, and, you know, what was the Navy movie? Master and Commander.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And they make movies about bad leaders, guys who shout and scream, guys who, like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And then they show up at the last minute, right?
Yeah, right.
That's generally bad leadership, and bad leadership is incredibly exciting.
Yep.
Which is why the movies about it. But good leaders, like, they don't make movies about Marshall or Bradley, right? Where you walk into the organizations, you know, they're like, everything's functioning, everybody gets along, and it just works. Like, hey, where's the boss today? Like, I don't know if they're here today. I don't know.
Yep.
Like, it just goes. Not very good movies, but the problem is, we're learning all these cues. The number of business leaders that I meet who keep quoting military and they're command and control assholes,
right,
and they don't recognize that command and control is a tool.
Yes.
Like, grinding is a tool.
Yes.
But you can't do it all the time. You'll break your organization.
Right.
You'll break your...
Yeah, and exactly. And so, like, yeah, in sort of your world, that again, I go back to kind of this, I always go back to veterans and mental health, because, again, it's what matters to me. But it's just like, you know, I use the analogy of if some guy is sitting there stewing on his thoughts and he's got a gun in his hand and a bottle of Jack Daniels, and he's like, can't figure it out, and his only tool is grind through, suck it up, suffer in silence. Like, or go harder. I don't even know what that means right there, right? Those guys know, and we all know how to do that. So that's not the solution, right? It's just not the solution.
Well, I think this is where military can do better, right? Which is, depending on the culture, which culture you're talking about. Like we grinding is so valuable, but it, as you said, time and place, right? And I think one of the things we can do better, and definitely in private sector, definitely military, let's just say where human beings exist, the one place we can all do better is to teach people how to say I'm lonely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm struggling and I need help.
Yeah.
And I see it when I see one of the problems is like the human brain cannot comprehend the negative, right? So for example, don't think of an elephant.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yes.
So then I see these signs. Like on bases that say, contemplating suicide, you're not a coward. Call this number.
Right.
Don't give up.
Yep.
You're like, no, don't say those things, right? Say, contemplating suicide, ask for help. Contemplating suicide, it takes courage to ask for help. You've got that courage.
Yeah. And it takes but to your thing, it takes leaders doing it, right? That's the leaders have to do it.
A buddy of mine he's still in uniform, great leader, great American, great warrior. When they started offering mental health services on the base, he recognized that all these officers were saying, hey, if you need help, go get it. I support you. But they didn't go for it.
Right.
And so he made a point of going for it, not for show, but for legit. And he always announced it. He's like, hey, Thursday from 3 to 4, I'm not available in my calendar because I'm talking to the head shrinker because
awesome.
Quite frankly, got shit going on at home. Don't know how to sort it out. I'll see you at 4 o'clock if you need me. And he just stated it like that.
That is awesome.
He normalized it. It was great.
Yes. Right. That's real leadership.
Courage goes back to courage.
Yes, totally. So the thing I want to end on here is kind of wrap this up, bring it full circle. Let's bring it full golden circle.
Full golden circle.
And just something that I think about, because as somebody who spent a lot of time post-military struggling mightily, mentally, chronic illness, that kind of thing, and the limbic system thing is a big component of that. When you get into chronic illness circles, that is your fight or flight. That's where that is. And you can develop all of these problems because your subconscious, your limbic system is stuck in this hypervigilant state and it completely jacks you up.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me that your why, your passion center is in the exact same spot. And it just makes me think like, that's how you kind of that's how you potentially get out of it. It is like that limbic system can either do one thing or the other. It can either fuel your passion and like your zeal for life and your why, or it can be filled with angst and anxiety and misery. And it's kind of going to default to one or the other. So like this is something I've had to do, right? Like make up my mind to not live in that sort of fearful, anxious state all the time.
Fight or flight exists in the limbic brain, and so does love, and trust, and loyalty, and friendship, and all of that stuff is in the same part of the brain. And it's like there are these videos going around online, which are pretty awful, but where somebody's holding their infant, and they go up to a wall, and with their hand they bang the wall. So like it says like you have your infant's head here, and you go up to the wall and you just bang it with your hand. Here's the bump.
Okay.
And then you go, oh, baby, are you okay? And the kid starts crying.
Oh, wow.
And you realize the learned response.
Yeah, right.
They didn't hit their head. There is zero pain.
Yes. Yeah. I get it. Yep.
Right. And they're responding and panicking because there's panic around them. Versus the kids fall over. They'll be like, you're fine. If you're hurt, come here. And those kids are realistic and resilient, and you realize that sort of so much of how we react to the world is based on the world that we keep around us. And so, the echo chambers that we go to, we know the dangers of echo chambers, right? And we also know there's so much data that, like, if people are smokers and one friend stops smoking, they like all stop smoking.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
If somebody's out of shape and one friend decides to get into shape, they all kind of get into shape. And the ripple effects of panic and fear, there's also ripple effects of love and productivity and taking care of each other. And one of the things that I've doubled down on, I'm actually starting to write a new book about it, is about friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at all of the, like, we have entire industries to help us be better leaders, entire industries to help us be better parents, better spouses, how to eat better, how to exercise better. And there's precious little on how to be a better friend.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if you ask most people, do you think you're a good friend? Most people say yes. But if you peel the onion just a little bit, you realize most people are shit friends. Like, would you cancel on a friend for a meeting? Would you cancel on a meeting for a friend? Oh, but my friend would understand. You get my point. Then you look at the challenges in the world, rising rates of depression, anxiety, inability to cope with stress, suicide, even the obsession with longevity. Friendship literally fixes all those things. Friendship is the ultimate biohack, you know? And yet when you have a friend around you who shows you love, who when you're in the shit, they don't try and fix you. They just get in the mud with you. Nobody wants to get in the mud with their friend. It's awful sitting in the mud. But you get in the mud with your friend and you go, yeah, this sucks. And I'm going to sit here with you.
Yeah.
Right? It can bring me to tears. Like when somebody says I'm depressed, we're like, no, get out. Look how great you are. Look, your family loves you. Look, or you could go and get into bed with them, eat ice cream and watch movies all day and just be sad with them.
Yeah.
Somebody feels not alone. I'll tell you one thing I learned, and then I'll stop. A friend of mine, I was at her house, and I was like, "Hey, how you been? I haven't seen you in a couple weeks." She says, "Actually, last week was really awful." She told me what happened. Went through a lot of stress, really bad week. And I said, "Why didn't you call me? I'm like one of your best friends. Like, I'm here for you always. You know that. Why didn't you call me?" She goes, "I did." I'm like, "You did not." I was like a little bit mad that my friend, that I wasn't there to support, right? She's like, "I did. I texted you." I'm like, "You did not text me." And we pull up my phone and we look at the text to see who's right. And it says, "Hey, what are you up to? Want to come over? Want to do dinner?" And I was like, this is the cry for help? How am I supposed to know that this is different from every other week?
Yeah.
Right? She had read an article that said that all we need when we are in a time of struggle is 8 minutes from another human being to feel not alone. And so she and I came up with this code now. When we're in a time of struggle, we text each other, "Do you have 8 minutes?" And that means, "I really need you." Anyone can step out of a meeting for 8 minutes. We can't fix it. We can't give them all the time, but we could give them 8 minutes, which is enough time for somebody to feel not alone, long enough to know that we'll be there for them in just when we can.
Yeah.
And we don't want to bother people, which is why we don't ask for help. Or when we're in the help, it's like, I've only got 5 minutes. I'll call them when I have an hour. And these things, these deadlines just keep getting pushed and pushed and pushed. And eventually what ends up happening is somebody's just alone. And so this idea of, do you have 8 minutes? We all have 8 minutes all the time. Just to check in with someone or to ask for 8 minutes from someone. Nobody feels any guilt asking for it.
Right.
And I think this is the thing. I think we need to learn how to be better friends. And it goes right back to where we started.
Yeah.
Which is, does it start with me or does it start with the group? And the answer is yes.
Right.
I will learn to be a better friend with the knowledge that just by being a better friend, my friends will learn to be better friends.
Yep.
That's skill. And everything you're saying, comes right back to this. Comes back to something super simple, which is friendship.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Yeah, it's amazing how many I've had a number of these conversations, and I feel like it's a similar word, but they almost always come back to community and purpose. Those two things. It's like that's the secret sauce. Those two things.
In the 1950s and 60s, there's a bunch of studies done with rats to understand addiction.
Yeah, the Rat Park stuff. Yeah, Johan Hari stuff. Yeah.
You know about this, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, well, I talked to Johan. Yeah.
Even better.
Yeah, I've read all his books. He's awesome. I love him. Yeah, he's great.
So that whole point, like the proof that it offers, that simply by having close relationships and community, we're less susceptible to all addiction.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's striking to me how many it's just like every single time it just reinforces those two things.
Yeah.
It's like that's it, you know.
Well, I really appreciate your open-mindedness and being pushed. And thanks for having me on. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I really appreciate the invitation. Thanks for giving me a space to ruminate with you and hash out new ideas and share what we came up with. So thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to On the X, the official podcast of the Navy SEAL Foundation and an Ironclad original series sponsored by Mechanics Wear. You can learn more about Simon Sinek at simonsinek.com and the foundation at navysealfoundation.org. You can also text the word On the X to 60104 to join our text subscriber list. See you next time.